Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth. And now the Friday Crime Report. I know that for some of you who watch my videos, I've become quite notorious for my disdain of white media entertainment, so today's crime report will probably seem a little unusual, but I felt that in light of certain fare at the theaters, this is particularly topical. You probably heard the right-wing nuts trying to make a blockbuster out of a little flick called The Sound of Freedom. The QAnon crowd and the Fox News fringe have been trying to hype it up because it deals with child trafficking and it has a white savior and because Disney decided to pass on distributing it. Now keep in mind, this happened because Disney is a family-friendly company, which the white right has been whining about for a few years now. Disney's supposed to be family-friendly. They're supposed to be family-friendly. Well, that's why they passed on distributing this movie. How can Disney, a family-friendly company, put out a movie about child trafficking? It's against their brand, ain't that right, DeSantis? How can Disney put out a movie about exploiting children? And yet the same whining scumbags who pretend to be outraged about basically everything are griping that Disney should have been racing to put this movie out. And if you're wondering how did Disney come to have this film in the first place, they acquired it after they bought 20th Century Fox. Because when Disney purchased 20th Century Fox, not only did they get the entire catalog of 20th Century Fox's films, but they also got all of the movies that were in development, like The Sound of Freedom. Now, the producers of that movie began their efforts immediately to get the distribution rights to the film back, since it was obvious that Disney, a family-friendly company, was never going to put the movie out. Disney owned this movie. They put it on ice, and if they wanted to, it would never have seen the light of day, because that's what happens when you own something. So if the right-wing nuts were right and Disney didn't want anyone to see this film, then all Disney would have had to do is nothing, and nobody would have ever seen it. But that's not what Disney did. They did the opposite. When Angel Studios came along to get the distribution rights, Disney made a deal to hand the rights over. Odd behavior for a studio that didn't want anyone to see this film, isn't it? Let me ask you this question. How often has Disney ever handed the distribution rights to a film over to someone else? When have they ever handed the distribution rights to any of their properties that they control over to anyone? They don't. This is a rarity. And it didn't take decades for them to do it either. It only took a few years for the producers to get the distribution rights. But the white right needs a phony victim narrative. They need to make it seem like this movie is a must-see because someone doesn't want you to see it. And hopefully some rubes will be conned into spending their meth and moonshine money on it. There's also another reality that the white right-wing nuts don't want to have to face. This movie is not blockbuster material. That's also part of why Disney was so willing to give away the distribution rights. This movie currently stands at $133 million domestically, this after almost a month in release. There is no international release for it, though the producers are threatening to try to peddle this dreck outside the US if they can. The movie is in almost 3,000 theaters right now. So if this was really some must-see movie that is extremely popular, then why is it only sitting at $133 million? Shouldn't it have made significantly more than that? The little old money that it's managed to get so far is just more right-wing nut outrage dollars, part of their cult of anger over everything. There's a lot of stupid money flowing around, and the most stupid money is on the white right. Just tell those racist rubes that buying this or that will make the libs mad, and they'll throw their state mental health disability checks at you. Grifting angry right-wingers is easy money, which is why so many people do it. But this flick isn't making any more money than the average rom-com. They so desperately wish they could be the next Taken, that's what they want people to think this movie is, but it's not. And politicizing it wasn't the smart move, not if you want to build a franchise, which of course they don't. And sure, because of this film's tiny production budget, they will be able to make their money back and then some. It's not going to be a huge profit, but it's going to be solidly profitable, though that's about as far as it's going to go. When you depend on Fox News and right-wing hate radio to boost your movie, you can basically forget about normal people coming to see it. Now, just to remind folks, the same trash who are cheering on this movie are also the same ones who pretended to support Gina Carano when she made her bomb for Ben Shapiro. And I ask the same question that I asked about Gina Carano's movie. If you're a movie studio, would you rather have the $133 million that this flick made, or the $800 million plus that Black Panther 2 made? Now, if you're some racist podcasting from your mother's basement or an online bigot like Ben Shapiro who hasn't put one penny into making these movies, you've got no skin in the game. So it doesn't hurt you when Gina Carano's theatrical release only makes $800. Then, of course, you can afford to talk stupid and say, well, black people don't sell tickets. Put the white guys out there. That's the movies you should be pushing. But you can't run a major studio off of stupidity like that. You have to run it off of the numbers. If you're trying to run a business, then you go with what sells the most tickets. And that's not generic white guy number 8,145,343,422. A studio can't afford to put white guys who don't sell ahead of black ones who do. All right, so what does this have to do with the crime report, you're wondering? I haven't seen this movie, but given how the white right's been gushing over it, I pretty much know what the gist of it's supposed to be. You got some white savior crap, some white guys who are allegedly trying to rescue children from child trafficking rings. But let's be honest, when you actually read the news, you see that it's mostly guys who look like Jim Caviezel who are the ones exploiting these children in the first place. So what this movie's trying to do is to give credit for stopping a criminal enterprise to the people who are the main perpetrators of it. This is psychological masturbation for bigots. By the way, before I go any further, I find it amusing that so many of the white right are furious that this so-called movie isn't getting media coverage. These are the same morons who claim that these media outlets are irrelevant and nobody watches them anymore and they can't compete with us online. Okay, so the media outlets who they attacked are irrelevant for not covering this crap, right? And what are these white right clowns saying? Why are you guys not talking about this movie? So they want media coverage from the very outlets who they say are irrelevant and don't matter and who they're bigger than and more influential than. Make it make sense. Except it can't because lunacy isn't meant to make sense. Lunacy is only meant to make the crazy person saying it feel good. It's just like Neely Fuller said, white supremacy believes in taking both sides of the conversation. They'll tell you all men are created equal except for the black ones who are only 3/5 human. All men are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights, except the black man who has no rights that a white man is bound to respect. Hey, movie reviewers don't matter. Nobody listens to them anyway. Wow, how come we can't get you to talk about us? The critics are ignoring this movie for the same reason Disney did, because audiences aren't flocking to see it. People like Ben Shapiro were saying that the Barbie movie was going to crash, and that movie has been setting box office records. So these guys are wrong in everything they say. If they say red, you better say black. But the reason that this movie does have relevance for the crime report is because you got these so-called UN peacekeepers who have been committing rape in all of these countries they've been going into, but especially in African and Caribbean countries, countries with predominantly black populations. And this is something I've been telling you about for about 15 years now, and I'll repeat it here. Ask yourself, why is it that whenever there's some tsunami or earthquake or some civil war or some disaster somewhere, any place where there's some sort of humanitarian crisis, you always have some of these white supremacists, these anti-black racists, who can't wait to get on the first thing smoking to get to those places? Why are these guys so eager to break their necks to get to these places that are suffering humanitarian crises? That's what people wonder. And then after a few years, we start to hear these horror stories trickling out of those places, talking about what these so-called aid workers and peacekeepers were doing while they were there. In one instance, you had a creep named Didier Bouget. He's French, as the name would imply, and he was working as a so-called logistics manager for a UN mission in the Congo in 2004, and he was raping underage girls while he was there. Now, he tried to sanitize it by making it seem like they were dirt poor and that there was basically no force being used by him, but we all know that if someone, especially a child, is hungry, it doesn't take much to coerce them into doing whatever you want. You can't claim that you didn't force them into doing something just because you didn't pull a gun or a knife, and somebody like him, you know there had to be some coercion involved. This animal was one of the handful of cases where someone actually did get put in prison for this, though he was put on trial in France. And they gave him a light sentence, naturally. But when you talk about international child sex rings, this is who's doing it. That's something to keep in mind when you got these idiots trying to cheer and crow about the sound of freedom. As Malcolm said, with very skillful manipulation of their media, the white supremacists can make the victims seem like the perpetrators and make the perpetrators seem like the victims, or in this case, like the good guys, as if they were just disinterested bystanders, decent folk who were just minding their own business and doing nothing, but were stirred by conscience. This is the reason why you want to be very careful before you call yourself listening to the white media on anything. This is the danger in trying to learn your history from movies, even if they're movies that you like. You want to learn history? Read a book. Probably not an option if you live in Florida, though. If you want to learn history, then go to a museum. I would recommend starting with the Hidden History Museum. Go to the places where the historical events actually occurred. But don't let the white media tell you who the good guys and the bad guys are. If you do that, you'll be the victim of a crime just as terrible as child trafficking. And that's allowing white supremacy to rob your mind. And that's this week's Friday Crime Report. Keep your eyes open and stay on alert, because there's a lot worse criminals out there than the ones the white corporate media chooses to show you. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Charlie, Jacques Hargett, Frederica Moore, Richard Allen Lovell, and Melvin Munoz. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.